Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call to order this meeting of the City of San Diego Commission on Police Practices Ad Hoc and Transition Planning Committee meeting of what is today's date? Today is the 22nd, April 22nd, 2022. I will call roll from the screen. I'm Doug Case. I am the chair of the committee and the first vice chair of the commission. We have Patrick Anderson, who is a member of the committee and is the community outreach chair of the commission. We have Commissioner Nancy Vaughn. We have Kate Yavendetti, who is from Women Occupy and our liaison with San Diegans for Justice. We have our interim executive director, Charmaine Mosley. We have our executive assistant, Elena Conde, and we have joining us David Niemeyer, who is with our executive search firm for the deputy executive director. And so if you can go and put up the agenda. And by the way, Diana Dent has an excused absence, and Brandon also has an excused absence. And as was mentioned, Nancy is rejoining our committee, and she's getting re-involved because we're going to be working on the investigation procedures very soon. We'd hoped to do so today, and I'll explain why we're not going to be able to do that today momentarily. Was there any public comment, Charmaine?
No public comment received.
Okay, the budget process, Charmaine, hopefully you've already turned in the slides for our presentation, which is going to be on May the 10th. And we included with the minutes, not the minutes, but with the agenda, if you go to the last slides, we have the slides that will be presented during that presentation. So if you want to, why don't you just scroll on down there and you can take a look at it. At the very end, there we go. Oh, back up just a little bit. So there you go, stop. And then, so there is the opening slide. Go to the next slide, scroll down. And the next one is just our mission statement and purpose, then scroll down. And this, you can take a look at this. This is the department highlights and accomplishments for the current fiscal year, and the anticipated activities of the next year. So it has some statistics in terms of number of cases that we've had. We have closed 88 Category 1 cases and 6 OIS cases and 1 ICD case, and how many Category 2 audits we've done, which is 15, and the hiring, et cetera. And then it talks about the upcoming year of hiring new staff, locating office space, clearing our backlog of active cases, the implementation ordinance, selecting new commissioners and an executive director, and training those new commissioners. Then moving on, this just has what our FTE change is in terms of staffing. Go on to the next one. And the primary changes are changes in the salaries and benefits based on our current staffing anticipations. We have requested $200,000 for investigative services. For contract services, that would be above and beyond the staff investigators that we have, $100,000 for executive hiring services, and that would be beyond the ones that we're doing in the current year. And the legal counsel there is part of the they're moving our legal counsel budget, and this is the general counsel, the staff counsel, not the contract counsel, to half a year. Although, as I explained to them yesterday, I think we'd be optimistic to think we'd be able to hire our permanent counsel within that time. You go down to the next slide. And you can read through that, and it also talks about the reclassification of FTE positions, and we're planning to hire a budget analyst so that we have both a complaints coordinator and a budget analyst. Right now, they are combined into one position in Robin's position, and we've realized that we really need to have two separate positions for that, and then go on to the next one. And that's just the concluding slide. So that's the presentation that will be made on the on May the 10th. Then go back to our agenda, because we're all the way back to the front. Okay, and so we have next item is staffing. We have David here to talk about the Deputy Executive Director. He sent out this morning a copy of the brochure or flip book, whatever it's called, for the position, which I think looks really sharp. I don't know if other people have had a chance to look at it, but I read through it and it seemed to incorporate everything that we talked about. Anybody else have an opportunity to look at it and have any feedback? Because I know he needs feedback by tomorrow, because it needs to get out so we can get it posted. Any hands raised? Patrick and Kate, did you have a chance to look at it?
I did, and I just got it this morning, and I've been in appointments all morning.
Yeah.
I thought it said that I can't remember, wanted feedback by Monday.
Monday?
Yeah, Monday is fine. If you can get it to me like Monday morning, we'll still stay on track. So if you want to look at it over the weekend, go ahead. So.
Okay, and Patrick, you've had a chance to look at it yet?
I did, and Charmaine and I had already gone through the text multiple times, including last week. I didn't really have any feedback.
Okay.
I think it looks sharp. I think the text is, I didn't go through line by line, but I assume that the text is as we had decided.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it looks good.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
And so the implementation ordinance, the amendment to the standard operating procedures will be on the agenda for, is it next Wednesday's PSNLN? And I think that's at 9 o'clock in the morning. Has that agenda been posted yet, Charmaine?
I'll go back and check.
And we're anticipating this is going to be on a consent. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. But I will be attending just to make sure if there's any questions in case it gets pulled from consent. Office space, we gave a report last week. Nothing new there other than we have received a copy of the proposal that the Department of Real Estate Assets and the Airport Authority, DREAM, is giving to the property owner. And we also had a meeting to talk about the IT needs for the space. So we'll keep you abreast as that happens. Nothing new with standing rules. Nothing that I'm aware of with community outreach, other than the community was invited to last night's joint meeting. There were a handful of community members, including Kate and Francine Maxwell and some of the usual folks, but it wasn't a huge turnout. But I think it was a very productive meeting, at least in terms of sharing information. and explaining things. And we'll talk about that further on in the agenda when we talk about the MOU. And David, you're free to stay on the meeting, but you're also, don't feel that you need to listen to our transition details.
I don't, if you don't mind, I'll stay on for a little bit. I wasn't able to the last 2 weeks, but it's good for me to hear some of this as you're going through it, because candidates will undoubtedly ask me questions.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome to stay. I just didn't want you to feel obligated.
Nope. I have about 20 more minutes I can stay on, so I'll stay on unless there's something sensitive you want me to get off.
Okay.
So, okay.
And then our legal counsel contract, we had kind of hoped that we would have Dwayne available to us this week, because April 21st, which was yesterday, was the deadline for signing the contract. But that just applied to the mayor signing the contract, and now has to go through some paperwork in purchasing and contract, and then be signed off on by Joan Dawson in the city attorney's office. Charmaine, do you think we're going to be able to get that done by next week, or do you know?
Yes, it's going through the, I believe it's the Ariba process, which is the centralized computer process within the city. Robin is working on that, so hopefully we'll have it done by next week.
Okay, and so we were waiting to have him here because he really is our expert on investigations, and so before we do our investigation procedures, we're wanting to have him actively involved in that, because one of our tasks is actually having him draft the procedures based on our input. And I think it actually, given this new situation with the countywide MOUs, the fact that he also is the counsel to CLRB will help maybe to facilitate some of that negotiation and procedure development. And nothing new in terms of meetings with the mayor and city council members. So continue on down. And nothing really new in terms of participation in the meet and confer process. We do have it on our agenda for the open meeting next week to potentially pass a motion to indicate that the commission feels that it's important for us to be involved in the meet and confer process. The outline for the standard operating procedures, we were hoping to begin going through that with Dwayne, but as I just explained, Dwayne's not able to join us until all of the signatures are on the contract. He has been participating by observing. He was at the meeting last night, didn't speak, but he attended, and so he has been keeping track of what we're doing, even though we haven't been able to utilize him yet. Let's go down for a second. Let me look at. If people don't mind, let's move around to the MOU, and we had a brief discussion prior to the meeting starting about the impact of the countywide MOU that was discussed last night. The department, the sheriff's department did not attend last night's meeting, and even though apparently the acting sheriff and the undersheriff had committed to attending, both of them at the last minute had conflicts, which was disappointing. But I thought that, what is the name of the assistant? I guess it was the captain who oversees investigations, is homicide. Is that correct, Charmaine, who was the primary speaker last night? And she's muted, so maybe she's elsewhere. Does anybody else recall the name of the the primary department representative from last night?
To do with that. Hang on a second, Doug. I had.
That was Assistant Chief Conley.
There you go.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I was blanking on his name. And he was very informative. As we discussed prior to the beginning of the meeting, the discussion was on the MOU, which is an MOU between all the law enforcement agencies in San Diego, and it doesn't discuss at all how they're going to interact with oversight agencies that currently exist, including those like CLRB and the CPP, which will be doing independent investigations of officer-involved shootings. And having it done by a third party will create some challenges for us, which we'll need to navigate through. And we can discuss this more when Dwayne is on board, but I think we're going to need MOUs with all the agencies that might be investigating officer-involved shootings that involve San Diego officers, which in most cases will be the sheriff's office. But if it is a case that involves both a sheriff's deputy and a police officer, it'll be investigated by Chula Vista Police Department. And if it falls under the category of, I'm forgetting the AB number, is it maybe 1506, but I'm not positive about that. But the recent bill that passed that requires the State Attorney General's office, excuse me, the State Attorney General's office to be the primary investigating agency when there is a officer involved shooting that results in the death of an unarmed civilian. And so in those cases, that'll be done by the Department of Justice. And so we probably will need MOUs with all those departments or agencies. Anything else people want to talk about regarding the MOU? And obviously, when we develop our investigation procedures, that'll be part of the discussion, and we can discuss with Wayne which comes first. Do we try to negotiate the MOUs before we write the procedures, or do we write the procedures and then from the procedures that will inform what needs to be in the MOU, et cetera? So I see Patrick has his hand up. So Patrick.
Patrick does have his hand up. Patrick has a lot to say about this MOU. Patrick has a lot of thoughts about the fact that they, in the first sentence, suggested that this was about transparency, and the effects of this memo precisely undermine transparency. But what I'll focus on, did we lose Nancy, by the way?
I don't know.
It looks like we lost Nancy. Is she in the participant list? She is. So if somebody could readmit Nancy.
I'm readmitting her now.
Okay. I'm not going to focus on the, in my opinion, setting aside the question of intent, the violation of the spirit of Measure B by this MOU, particularly the manner in which it was hidden from view of this commission and of the public before being signed. I will say that this commission, in my opinion, should use every means possible to ensure that the investigative procedures that are defined as being best practices for commissions by the National Association for the Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement be included in any subsequent MOUs that now need to be developed with those 4 other agencies. Such means of ensuring that those things be included might include getting the California Attorney General involved and or other state level officials and agencies. Just to be, transparent, since this is a public meeting, and explicit about what I mean, we have put forward over many months, and so the San Diego Police Department was fully aware of this, the fact that investigators for independent commissions must have access to crime scenes. The interview process must be very carefully managed because of California state POBAR laws, which is to say that when an officer is being investigated because of a shooting, our investigators need to be in the room and authorized to ask questions during the first interview, because any subsequent interview requires that that officer be given full access to the investigation file at that point. So there are numerous aspects, evidence collection by these other agencies that we know nothing about. We've never visited their storerooms. We've never, as part of our training, we go through the SDPD crime labs. We go to the armory. We go through all these different, we understand who works there and how they operate. We have zero relationship with these other agencies. And so our investigators need to have full access to every piece of evidence, period, immediately. I don't want to spend any time venting about the fact that this has happened, but the fact that it has happened, to me, escalates the necessity of our investigatory procedures in these various MOUs to a much higher level than it was before. And we need to be willing to go to whatever level is required to ensure that our investigators have access. Otherwise, one of the main powers of Measure B will have been undermined by this MOU. That's part of what I have to say, but I'll stop there.
Okay. And then, to go back for a second in terms of which comes first, the investigation procedures we're developing have to be approved by the city council. But what's, the monkey wrench that's now in the process is we're dealing with other agencies, and our ability to compel the sheriff's department or other agencies to do the things that Patrick just talked about is going to need to be accomplished by an MOU and not through the San Diego City Council's approval of our investigation procedures. And so we're going to need to navigate that, and it's going to become much more complicated. And I see that Kate's hand is up.
Yeah, I also want to refer to what I heard as a very strong statement and caution from Paul Parker last night. Yes, Nancy, yes. Basically telling us that it has not been easy for CLRB to work with the sheriff's department, that they've had to use subpoenas to get records, that they have had to force their hand fairly consistently. And I'm not also going to get into, intent like Patrick said, but I just think it's a caution for the CPP. And also, I think what I've heard is that the city council didn't know that this was in process. At least our contacts at D4 didn't know anything about it. I don't know what the mayor knew about it. I don't know why CPP wasn't told about it in your quarterly meetings. So I think it's, whether it is a deliberate attempt to make things more difficult, I think the result is that, first of all, it's going to be a lot more work for CPP because you're going to have to deal with all these new MOUs. You're going to have to learn all the new procedures of these other, of Chula Vista and the sheriff's department. It's going to put a tremendous burden on CPP. And, I expected them to say that it was, I didn't know about that legislation that didn't pass, but I expected him to say, well, you know, the community doesn't want it to be done internally. And so, you know, they said, this is what the community wants. This isn't what the community wants. The community wants something independent. Community doesn't want one law enforcement agency doing another. So I think that not only the community, but certainly the CPP itself needs to be very cautious isn't the right word, but very careful in and complete in what you put in the MOUs and the agreements that you get from these other agencies, because it's clear from what Paul Parker said, this, I'm putting words in his mouth, this is my words, that we can not expect the Sheriff's Department to be particularly cooperative, and that they will use any loophole they can to not be cooperative. And that will seriously impair the investigations that you're able to do.
I think he was saying that without saying it. He was very tactful last night, but I got that message from him, Kate. So, and you know, they said the reason they didn't bother to tell Brandon and company in those meetings was it won't change our procedures. Isn't that right, Charmaine? Isn't that what the mayor's office actually said? They knew this was coming, but they didn't mention it to us or think we needed to know because it won't change our procedures.
Well, and that goes back to what I was saying previously, is that their comments were based on an assumption that we would be continuing to review investigations as opposed to doing independent investigations.
Right.
And in the short term, that maybe is true. And, you know, they gave us verbal assurance last night we would have the same level of access to information that we have from the department. But the key issue is when we begin doing independent investigations, and Patrick alluded to this, is the timing of the information. You know, it's not sufficient to have them turn over their investigation when they're done and say, now you can look at it. That we have to be able to do things on a parallel track. And that's going to be somewhat complicated with multiple agencies involved. And so we'll leave it at that unless other people have comments. We clearly have our work cut out for us, and it suddenly became more challenging than it was previously. Unless people have additional comments on that, let me go back to the unfinished business. And again, we're going to leave D until we have a complete list, and probably we'll leave it until we have staff who will be able to help us do that review and evaluation. But I did want to spend, since we do have some extra time today, since we're not going to be doing investigation procedures, talking about models of case review by the Permanent Commission and how we can make them less time intensive, because the new commission is going to have additional duties. We're going to have more cases because we're going to be doing internal cases. And there has been a clear message that we need to make the commission more accessible by reducing the amount of time that is required to be a commissioner. And so some of the discussion that we've had is to what degree can we utilize staff of the commission to help us in the review process, keeping in mind that we will basically be dealing with two types of situations. We'll be doing with independent investigations, which will have a report from our own independent investigator, and the role of the commission will be to review the report, the work that's done by our investigator. But the question is, in terms of reviewing complaints and reviewing investigations of misconduct that have been conducted by the department but are not independently reviewed by the commission, can we and should we utilize staff in helping us to complete that task? And I don't know if anybody here has any thoughts on how to make our review process less time intensive, but still keep it independent and thorough. So
I think we do a good job the way it is, Doug.
we do a good job the way that it is, but the amount of time that it takes to do it is not sustainable, especially if we're going to be adding new tasks to the commission. And so, but I hear Nancy saying that she doesn't want staff to assist in the process.
So, and this is the reason why. This is what I haven't been able to say to you guys. I've heard me talked about in your alluded to, but the reason why is I don't think paid city staff should be doing investigations of paid city staff. To me, it's the same thing as having just a different law enforcement agency doing investigations into our law enforcement agency. I'm not sure you guys think that way, but it looks like it to me. And I don't think we can ask paid city staff to do that kind of investigation. I don't expect city staff to have, to me, the right skepticism in their approach that I would like to see, and that I think we bring as citizens to our reviews.
Patrick.
So I understand what Nancy is saying. And so as Nancy was talking, I was trying to think through some examples of cases, you know, that I've had over the last few years. And when okay, so let me stop for a minute. So the idea that staff would sort of do the main part of the review is what CLRB does. And the staff on CLRB, if I understand CLRB correctly, they sort of present their review of the cases to CLRB members who then review that review and vote on the case as it's been presented. I'm understanding that correctly, yes?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, and there are other oversight agencies that use that model. I do want to note that we are mandated by the to use paid city staff to conduct our own investigations for officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths, and then any other cases the commission deems it wants an independent investigation. So I think what I start to think about, what are the aspects of case review that are so time intensive that the staff could help with? And a part of what comes to mind, for example, is writing up the incident summary. But in fact, when I go back through the cases, have we lost Nancy again?
Yes.
Well, I really wanted Nancy to hear this because I wanted to make sure I would. Well, when I go back and think through cases, the process of writing up the incident summary actually does play a pretty pivotal role in how I think about that case, because it requires me to piece together a timeline and to pay attention to really specific interactions and events based on the evidence, the body-worn camera footage, the interviews, photographs, etc., that will often open a window onto what's going on, or a mistake that's been made, or a problem that isn't represented in the IA investigation. And I wouldn't want to lose that part of it. You know, it's the sort of technical definition of that is it's the construction of a narrative of what occurred. And it sort of forces you as an oversight practitioner to go step by step, second by second through a timeline of events. And at each point on that timeline, you have to go back to the evidence and compare. Okay, did this person move their hand in that way? Did this person aggressively step forward? Did this person say this, that, or the other? I do think so it's a really hard question. I do think the form of the case report is too bulky, and it's too onerous to produce these, you know, incredibly florid, descriptive, almost Baroque case reports. Nancy's back, by the way. But I wouldn't want to get rid of commissioners piecing together the narrative of what's happening, and writing that incident summary, because that is really what forces you to go second by second through the evidence. So you know, sorry I'm going on so long, but it's really difficult to think through. I mean, we have an unbearable caseload. There's no way that the current commission can get through it. There's no way that even before the pandemic, if we want the kind of diversity of representation on this commission, parents, people who are full-time workers, you know, then the caseload that we were getting used to, or that we were used to before the pandemic, we do need to find ways to lighten that so that more people can conceivably participate in this commission. So for me, I think I partly agree with Nancy, that slow, careful, second by second work of piecing together what happened is essential to the work we do. It's just essential to good oversight. So then my mind turns to, what are the other time-intensive parts of that we can begin to scale down or delegate out? And I'm struggling, because Doug, as you know, up till now, I have agreed with you vehemently that we have got to do something about this, the amount of just the work-intensive nature of this, if we're really going to be able to function at all. I don't think the answer is to expect the staff to basically do the case review and the case presentation for this delegate body of commissioners to vote on. I don't think that is what the community wants. I think the community wants volunteer community members to perform oversight. And this, to me, is what oversight is.
Although there's no other oversight group in the nation that I'm aware of that does it the way that we do.
Is that right?
You know, and most of them, they have professional staff who write reports, and the role, you know, most of them operate in a manner similar to CLRB. Now, I agree with Nancy 100%. What we do is really tremendous public service, because we have citizens who are involved in doing that. Most other places use an inspector general model of oversight, and and most of the people involved in NACOL are professionals. That's what they do for a living, is they look at the cases and so forth. And our model has been one that's volunteer based, and we do it very well. And that's the dilemma, is what we do very well is very time intensive, and as we're trying to expand the commission, how do we keep that same level of volunteer-oriented oversight, but still be able to do it in an efficient manner? And I think we're all struggling with how to do that. And I don't think we're going to come up with the answer today, but
can I just ask, for officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths, because we're required to do independent investigations, our investigators will write those reports.
Yeah.
Right. So we're really only talking about the review cases right now.
The complaints.
Right?
Citizen complaints.
Right. Complaints.
Well, and keeping in mind too that, and we don't know how many this is going to involve, but we have the ability, and I think the community's expectation is that we're going to be looking at cases far beyond just officer-involved shootings. So we're going to be independently investigating cases that meet the criteria that are spelled out in Measure B. And I'm assuming that those will be very similar to the officer-involved shooting. In other words, our investigator will investigate it or write a report, and we will review that report.
So this is helpful because what that means is that for all officer-involved shootings, for all in-custody deaths, and for all other complaints that meet those criteria within the charter, which includes community interest, commissioners have concerns, I forget what they are.
Internal police.
Okay, so for all of those that meet that threshold, our investigators will be writing the reports, not us.
That's my assumption, yeah.
So then what we're talking about here are only those complaints that have not risen to that level of concern. And so that's actually really informative. And I think the community should understand this, that the cases that the community is clearly most concerned about and upset about and so on are already going to be sort of siphoned over to professional independent investigators building the investigation from the ground up. So what we're talking about today are the cases that don't meet that threshold, the complaints that don't meet that threshold, right?
Exactly, yeah. And so
I think that does change my opinion a bit, actually, now that we're sort of getting this close to it. Nancy, but I want to hear from you too. I mean, every complaint is important. Every complaint is important. I don't disagree with you about that.
I have a 96-year-old friend who needs me to pick her up at 1:30, so I'm gonna have to go. But I want you guys to think in terms of how many things have we discovered in our work that would not be covered, would not be possibly discovered if one of the investigators was doing the review that we do. And I would go back to, there are a number of cases where we have found things that became other findings in some cases that maybe would be ignored by an investigator.
Or much bigger issues, Nancy.
Yes.
But keep in mind, these are independent investigators. And so these are people who are doing professionally what we have been trained to do as volunteers. And so they will be looking at it from the same critical eye, and perhaps even a more critical eye, because they have greater professional expertise in actually doing that work. I
have a hard time putting faith in that, Doug. After working with you and working with Patrick and working with the others and seeing how we dig in, you and Poppy bring reports that just are so well done and so detailed. When I see all of that and see how we interpret it, I don't think we're going to find that in investigators, some of whom may or may not be former police investigators, because those are the people that come with the experience. I got to go. So glad to be working with you guys. Look forward to next week. Thank you.
So anyway, I don't think we're going to resolve this today, but we do need to think about it as the commission moves forward. And as we've discussed before, to a certain degree, these decisions should be up to the new commission to make, as opposed to us. But one of the reasons that I brought it up is that if we are planning on utilizing staff to help in that role, that may have an impact on future budgets that will need to be made. The budget requests will need to be made in a timely fashion. And so is your hand back up, Patrick?
Yeah, I want to comment on what Nancy just said. I'm not sure that I agree with her. Doug, I think you're more on this side of things. I do think, though, that what she's suggesting is that there is real value to ordinary community members, much like a jury, not professional people, but a jury. We are ordinary community members. By law, because we've done so much work to get this into the ordinance, there are going to be certain kinds of diversity mandated into the group of commissioners that are not mandated into the group of investigators. right? And so the investigators, by definition, aren't going to have the same level of diversity in all of these different ways that the commission is going to have, because that's what we've pushed for. I think there's value to that. But I also want to note that when we have had questions about investigations, we have often called in people like Jason, you know, people who are professional investigators, just like the ones we're going to hire. And we have felt very empowered, inspired, and we've taken a lot from how they look at cases. And I also want to say publicly, I don't think I'm violating our confidentiality rules. You know, no, I'm not. I'm speaking generally. Charmaine, especially when Charmaine was the only staff member, would read all of our reports, would look at all of the cases, not with the same depth, would be there for all the discussions. And Charmaine would often be asking the very same questions that we were, or would raise objections that, that even some of us hadn't seen, you know? And I hope I'm not violating our confidentiality, but Charmaine is a paid city employee, professional in oversight. So when I think about people like Jason, people like Charmaine, and many, many other people we've invited into these discussions who are professionals, I have a lot more confidence in the investigators to pull out a lot of what we would pull out. But I think Nancy has a point that the ordinariness of the commission, the fact that we do operate like a jury of you know, a multiply diverse jury of non-professionals, there's value to that 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 we can't just abandon.
And I kind of like that model. Let me get to back that in just a second, but I do agree that you know, most of the people in NACL are professionals, and they're very good at doing their oversight work. You know, they're not pro law enforcement you know, people, and so people that are with all the different agencies that on a nationwide basis who do this work professionally are very dedicated and proficient at what they do in terms of it. But I like the model that, I mean, I like the jury concept that Patrick said, because that's really where I think the value is. You know, but a jury doesn't go in and do the investigation or look at everything. They're given all of the facts, and I guess under the jury model they can't ask questions. But at least in terms of the model of having the citizens who are volunteers being given all the information and being asked to come to a judgment on that.
I mean, I will say that, you know, I have like half a dozen cases I've done that I will never be able to forget, that live with me because of how difficult they were. One of them, the most recent one, which I'm sure Doug and Charmaine, you also remember, I was lead reviewer of that file, and I think that what I and my team were able to find with that case maybe wouldn't have been caught by investigators, at least not in the same way. Yeah, so I think yes, I'm liking this emergent jury model, but I think there has to be a kind of balance here, because those of us on this commission, especially over time, really are able to see things that, just from our lived experience, that people who are just focused on the ABCs of investigation may not catch in the same way. That's the balance that we're trying to figure out. I'll stop talking now.
Yeah, and I hope that we're more than CLRB, because the impression I get from CLRB is that they read investigation reports and they maybe ask questions, but they don't get as involved as we do in listening to interviews and watching body-worn camera in particular and so forth. And I think that's part of the critical. And so I like the jury concept, but I also think we need to have the commission be able to ask the questions and to look at the original evidence and not just the ones that they decide to present to us, but that we have the ability to take the initiative to look at it ourselves. So I'm going to go on unless Kate has something. Kate's been listening to this. So, okay. Why don't we leave it to Kate to come up with a solution for next week then? And so I will keep this on the agenda so we can give it some thought. But we don't need to come to a conclusion today, but I did want to have us have that discussion so we had some extra time. I think we're done with the agenda. If you want to scroll down, hopefully Dwayne will be here next week and we can begin working on the investigation procedures, and maybe our first part of our discussion should be making some of those decisions of what comes first, the investigation procedures or the MOUs, and what his thoughts are on how to proceed with all of that. And I think that probably will take the bulk of the meeting. Is there anything else that people want to have included on the agenda?
I want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank Alina for the job that she's doing, not only being here at all these meetings and taking notes, but also the fact that throughout the week you have to spend so much of your time tracking us down and trying to get us on the phone to figure out some schedule for something. Don't think that you aren't appreciated. You are.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Okay. Any other items of concern? Okay, then with that, we are adjourned at 1:30 exactly. So thank you.